Hello, Bob Wells here, and welcome back to the Undercurrent Stories podcast, where we dive deep into the hidden depths of our world, one fascinating guest at a time. In fact, in today's episode, we're travelling back in history to an older world, and I'm delighted to be joined by an acclaimed author who needs no introduction for fans of historical fiction. In fact, it's his third time on the show, Tony Riches. Tony is known for his immersive and meticulously researched novels set in the Tudor era, and he's the author of the best-selling Tudor trilogy, as well as several standalone works that shine a light on some of the most fascinating and sometimes overlooked figures in British history. Today we're here to talk about his two most recent novels, Bess, Tudor Gentlewoman, and Frances, Tudor Countess, books that peel back the layers of court life to reveal the inner worlds of two extraordinary women living in the shadow of the Tudor throne. We'll be exploring the inspirations behind these characters, the challenges of writing historical fiction, and what it takes to breathe new life into real people from centuries past. So, whether you're a Tudor history enthusiast, a fellow writer, or you just love a good story, you're in for a real treat. Tony Riches, welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
In fact, I should have said welcome back. It's only been a couple of years that you were on, wasn't it?
It all seems to blur into a continuum, you know.
Yeah.
But I'm grateful for you to make the time to have me back again, because it's quite a big thing in my writing life. After 14 years writing about the Tudors, I'm finally done, and I'm into the brave new world of the Stuarts.
Well, you had me a bit anxious there, because when you said we're finally done, I thought, was that it then? Obviously not.
I started off with Owen Tudor's first meeting with Queen Catherine of Valois in, 2011.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I eventually worked my way all the way through the Tudors until I got to the last days of Elizabeth I. And I really wanted to convey the complexity of her character. And the idea was to show her through three of her favourite men and three of her ladies. And so those are the last two books of what has become the Elizabethan series are, as you've said, about two of her ladies that knew her very well, but very differently as well.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to talk about those in a bit more detail in a minute. But just for those people who haven't yet listened to our two earlier episodes, please could you just give a brief outline of your life's journey and how you originally became an author? Yeah,
well, I was born in Pembroke, within sight of Pembroke Castle, which is the birthplace of Henry VII. And I decided to look into his life a bit. And most of the books I found were fairly dry and portrayed him as a miserly king. And I decided to write the book I wanted to read and spend the rest of my life researching his story. And I gathered so much material, I decided to write it as a trilogy, with him being born in the first book, come of age in the second, and become King of England in the third. So the third one starts with the Battle of Bosworth and ends with his death. And having done that, I then decided to carry on, because he was nursed on his deathbed by his youngest daughter, Mary Tudor, not to be confused with Queen Mary. And she was Mary Tudor, Queen of France, and her story was so fascinating. I went on to write what I called the Brandon trilogy, because she married Henry VIII's best friend, Charles Brandon, who, after her death, he married an equally fascinating heiress called Catherine Willoughby. And I really did think that was kind of me done with the Tudors, but I realised then that I was drifting into the start of the Elizabethan era. And so that's kept me busy, surprisingly, for 14 years. And when I started out, I had to really work hard to find any letters and papers at all in Owen Tudor's time. And when I finished, I had such a wealth of information, original letters, original poems and songs, and day-by-day accounts at the Elizabethan court. that it flipped around. So I had to decide what to leave out rather than what I could include.
Yeah, I've read one of your books, Penelope. I'd like to read more. What I found really good from it was, and I've seen this written about you, is that we let you do all the research and fact find, and then you bring it to life with your stories. You add colour, and you actually tell readers how you think those people felt.
This is my mentor, my inspiration was Hilary Mantel, who said that after the historians have done their work, that's where the historical novelist's task begins, because there are so many gaps. And as you rightly say, the biggest gap of all is, what did it feel like to suddenly find that half of your family is dead from the sweating sickness and the rest could be gone in a day, you know?
Yeah.
And I was able to draw on the experience of COVID, of all things, for example, because I'd actually felt the same concerns as they would have felt then, you know? And there are things that you can do like that. But I did find it quite a challenge. The three men I could really relate to and get into that. The three ladies were just that bit harder. But luckily, my wife is my proofreader. So as soon as each chapter's done, she's straight onto it and will tell me quickly enough if I've got something a bit wrong. And also my editor, I've had the same editor for the whole series, and she cross-references what I've said in previous books. So she can tell me if I've given somebody a different title or rank or whatever, or missed somebody out that should be included. So that gives it a sort of completeness, which I don't think I would be able to achieve on my own. And also, I'm a bit of a stickler for historical accuracy. So wherever I can, I like to find primary sources. As I said, letters are great because they give you a real sense of the voice of the person.
Yeah.
And I cross-reference as many historical biographies as I can, which sometimes contradict each other. So that's fun when I get into that sort of grey zone where even the historians don't agree.
You mentioned when we last met that you spend half the year is researching and then the other half is writing.
The summer is when I like to take it easy, really, go and visit actual locations.
Yeah.
So in the Elizabethan series, the Tower of London's been a favourite, but I also clambered all over the replica Golden Hind in London and things like that. I went and visited Grimsthorpe Castle, where Catherine Willoughby lived, and all those sort of things, to get a real sense of the place. And then I start writing in the autumn and try and get the first good draft to my editor by the spring. Yeah. And I'm fairly relaxed about when it's actually published, so I don't give her any deadlines at all. She can take as long as she likes. And then as soon as that's done, I've got a really good audiobook narrator, and she then has the master copy and starts creating the audiobook. So it's an annual cycle, which works extremely well for me. But I can only write one book a year because of the amount of work involved.
One book a year, I would say, is ample, really, to give you that opportunity to do.
I did try two once. And
did you?
I did say never again.
Yeah.
It's too much work. But I have got the next 3 years planned. And there's a benefit to that because I can, so many times I read something in the paper or see it on the telly or see a reference to a new book coming out. And I can gather background material for up to 3 years ahead, which is what I'm doing now with the Stuarts. So
when we talk about, and we're sort of getting two birds in one stone here, but when we talk about Bess and Frances, how do they differ as protagonists in terms of their sort of personality, their ambition, their influence at court?
It's fascinating because they're friends, first of all, so that's an important starting point. But both of them know Penelope Rich, who you mentioned. That's the third of the Queen's ladies I wrote about. And all three of them have a very different perception of the Queen. So Frances, her father is Francis Walsingham, the Queen's spy master.
Yeah.
And sadly for him, the he had various things wrong with him, but he ended up incapacitated in his house in Seething Lane. And Frances was nursing him. She was like his full-time carer. So I hit on the idea that she was better educated than most men because she was his only surviving child. And she would have been party to a lot of the intrigue that he was uncovering, which ranged from, all sorts of things. One of them was the Throckmorton plot. And Frances would have known Bess, who at the time was one of the Queen's ladies, was a Throckmorton. And so it's interesting to speculate about what correspondence was passed between them. And what happened was, after her father died, Frances then married, of all people, Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, who I'd written about as one of the three men. And that was not a good idea, because he was a scoundrel. And quite often when I was writing about him, I had a raised eyebrow at his antics. But he was really not a great husband for Frances, who was a really nice person.
Yeah.
So the person she wanted to marry was Philip Sidney. And Philip Sidney was, of course, Penelope Rich's secret, not so secret lover. So that you've got all these crossovers, which I enjoy because it links the books together like a thread which weaves in and out of all of them. So if you only read one of them, that's fine, because they should work standalone. But if you read all of them, you get a richness of the place and time, which is impossible to do in one book.
And how did did Bess or Frances present particular challenges in terms of character development? And if they did, how did you overcome it?
Spoiler alert for those who haven't read Bess, but she fell in love with another rascal called Walter Raleigh, and married him without the Queen's permission, which is, as you know, a criminal thing to do. And both of them were sent to the Tower of London and locked up. So that very much coloured Bess's sense of how she felt about the Queen. And interestingly, Walter was let out early, and he didn't even campaign to get his wife let out. So she ended up still locked in the Tower without even knowing that Walter had been released until her brother came and told her. And her brother was able to arrange for her release.
Yeah.
But all three of them, Penelope, Frances, and Bess, were, to all intents and purposes, banished from court. So what you get, it starts off as really quite an intimate relationship between, for example, Bess and Elizabeth I, because as her gentlewoman, she helps her dress in the morning, and they're alone together, and obviously will confide things in each other, to each other, which they wouldn't want to go anywhere else.
Yeah.
And she sees the Queen exactly as she is, without any artifice. And then that's flipped around, and she finds herself in a dingy jail cell in the Tower of London. So it was quite interesting to explore how that might have changed her and how she might have thought about Walter. And what was an extra interesting thing, I said that Frances was better educated than most men because her father made sure of it. But poor Bess was only educated enough to be able to run a household, which was typical for the time. So she could put together a set of accounts and write a short sort of shopping list and things like that.
Yeah.
But she certainly didn't do Latin or French, or she could barely read and write. So with help from Walter Raleigh, as well as her son's tutors saw her as a bit of a challenge because she was really keen to learn to read and write. And they were obviously living on on site. So they were able to easily find. She used to sit in on her children's lessons.
Oh, right.
And what I found fascinating was that some people might have been glad just to be able to read a book and leave it at that. But she would dash off letters to people like Robert Cecil, one of the most powerful men in the country, asking favours and complaining about things. And when you read them, they're written in the English is almost impossible to understand in parts because it's written phonetically.
Yes.
So you have to sort of set what you know to one side to be able to understand her point. And Robert Cecil took the trouble to do that because I've seen her letters and I've seen his replies. But what that gave me is not just a sense of her voice, but of her courage and dedication and commitment and fearlessness, if you like, but also of how people like Robert Cecil, that are often portrayed as uncaring, uncharitable, self-obsessed, are really quite different when you read between the lines.
Hi, it's Bob here, just a quick interlude. Hope you're enjoying this episode, and if you would like to hear more interesting interviews, we have over 150 episodes to date with many fascinating guests talking about a wide variety of topics which include music, history, philosophy, fitness, food and drink, adventure, contemporary culture, and many, many more. I'm sure there's something that you'd really enjoy. So all you need to do is just visit undercurrentstories.com or search Undercurrent Stories in any of the podcast platforms. And now back to the show. Yes. You mentioned again letters, and you mentioned earlier on about reading of letters is able to give you a lot more perspective in terms of the feelings. The letters that you read, are they the original letters?
Yeah, what's good is if you actually, there are various books of letters. So, for example, there's a 2-volume set of Robert Devereux's letters, which was a gold mine when I was writing about him. That's the Earl of Essex. With Penelope, there's only a dozen letters, and some of them seem quite superficial until you, as I say, start reading between the lines. And it's a lot of hard work because you can't just Google Bess Raleigh's letters and they all come up on the screen. You have to find them. And then some historians have gone to the trouble of transcribing them and then adding their own thoughts as well. So I found that jolly useful because you can say, well, does this chime with what I understand, or does it seem like they've got it slightly wrong, you know?
I was wondering if you actually saw the actual original paper in terms of, with your gloves on with some museum somewhere, whether you did that.
You can. I live in Tudor, Wales, and London is quite a hike from here.
Yeah.
If I lived in London, I probably would go to the National Library and things like that more often. But I'm quite happy to rely on letters which I can download from the internet.
Yeah. And what do you think these two novels reveal about the roles and the almost limitations of women? I mean, I know we've got a female queen, but in the we think of the Tudor court and everything. What do the novels reveal about limitations of women?
It shows that they had far more influence than certainly when I was taught history at school. I wasn't given a sense of how much influence they had,
Yeah.
And looking back now, I can see then that, for example, if you go back to Frances, she was influencing her father, who was the Queen's spymaster, advising on state policy. So that you can't get more powerful than that, really. And then, for example, in terms of his thinking on war with Spain or peace with Spain and what the outcomes of either of those policies might lead to. Yeah. And then with Bess, because she knew the Queen so well and she knew all the people in the Queen's court, she could very easily get access which normally would have been, she wasn't a noble, you see. She was part of a Catholic family, the Throckmortons,
Yeah.
and they could have very easily been wiped out. And so that made it more interesting to write about her rather than less interesting, because she was so different from the other two ladies, who were both really from very privileged backgrounds.
Do you see any sort of parallels between the Tudor era and today? I mean, when I say that, I'll caveat it with, we read books about the Tudor era and the Elizabethan era, and we watch TV, and it seems to be full of intrigue and scheming. Do you see any parallels with it today?
I think it just goes round and around. I mentioned about, for example, COVID, and then you can compare our experience of COVID with their experience of the plague and things like that.
Yeah.
But in terms of the sort of intrigue, I think that nothing much has changed an awful lot, but that women there seemed to be this thing where the men seemed to horribly underestimate the women. I think you said you read Penelope.
Yes.
She was way ahead of her time. She would cope quite happily in the modern world, by the way. And because she didn't care about what people thought at all.
No.
And she was living in an open, adulterous relationship, and quite happy with that. And basically, if the man wasn't, then he wasn't right for her. That's the way that she used to see things. And the way that she would influence things, it had a subtlety to it. So she would influence people like Robert Dudley, who was eventually became her stepfather, and he would then exert influence back through the court, and nobody would ever know that she was at the source of it all. Do you see what I mean?
Yes. Yeah, with all this study that you do, you must really find that you really get to know these characters and personalities, and I guess that must help you. You mentioned earlier on about some of the characters that turn up again and again in the same book. Right. You must really get to know those people.
I tell you what, when I finally sign off the edited manuscript, I feel quite a sense of loss because, for example, if you take Bess, I'd been with Bess for 4 years because it goes right back. She first crops up a long time ago, and the same with all of them. Really, is that it's one of those strange things whereby you get to the point where if I was to go on Mastermind about Bess Throckmorton, I'd enjoy the challenge because I know so much about her life, and then you stumble across little strange things which surprise you, like the fact that she outlived everybody despite her quite challenging life, and she died at the I've forgotten what it's called now, the building that the TV series Ghosts.
Yes, great series.
Well, that manor house that they use is where she died. So
right.
That's quite fascinating. But also she was related to nearly everybody that was in the gunpowder plot, except for Guy Fawkes. Yeah. So, the Catholic network runs right back through all of that, so that if you look at the family trees, a lot of them are... So Catesby was a cousin of hers.
Yeah.
And so she could have been back in the Tower of London very easily, many times.
Have you ever considered writing... Because you've done so much research on that period, have you ever considered writing a non-fiction book?
Yeah, I've written a couple of non-fiction books. I've decided what I really enjoy is that bit about where the historian can go no further and the work of the historical novelist begins.
Yes,
and one of my non-fiction books, I've always been fascinated by Captain Scott and the Antarctic, and I wrote a book about the Terra Nova, and that was fascinating to do and to research. And I actually was in touch with the divers that discovered the Terra Nova on the ocean floor and things like that.
Oh, right.
So there's so many things through, but the rewards really come through taking such a complex world as the Elizabethan court and really starting to understand it and live it. So if I was to travel back in time, I think I'd cope quite easily there.
And notwithstanding all the research that you did for your previous novels, when you got to Bess, were there any stories or things that you discovered that surprised you?
Yeah, I think her complete loyalty to Walter Raleigh, despite everything that he did, he spent all their money. He got them locked. He got locked up in the Tower so many times I couldn't count them all, really. And she stood by him. So she had a little house round the corner from the Tower of London, and every day she would go there. And you can actually, the cell that he had has been sort of recreated. It's called the Bloody Tower, but in his day it was called the Garden Tower.
Yes.
And he had a garden outside, and the people at the tower have put a little herb garden outside as a gesture of remembrance to that.
Oh, that's nice.
You can actually sit in there and sense what it must have been like. You can see this very similar views out the windows and get a sense of what it must have been like. And she did that for years. So she could have easily left him, or I don't know, done different things, or visited him once a month. But she dedicated her life to her family.
Yeah. So you're at the end of this series. What's next?
Well, both the last two books. So in Frances, we see the death of Elizabeth and then the appearance of James on the scene, and the same in Bess. And so I'd already introduced King James and his rather curious Stuart court, but I didn't know very much about it. And I certainly didn't know much about his long-suffering wife, Anna of Denmark. I don't even remember her being mentioned when I did history at school. And so I started looking into her story, and that was intriguing because she was only 14 when her parents married her off to King James of Scotland.
Yeah.
And she left Denmark on a ship in a storm, pretty sure she would never make the return voyage ever in her lifetime. So that's quite an interesting start to a book, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm working on now, is that what I'm trying to do is to, whilst working within the framework of all the historical facts of her life, is to try and understand what it must have felt like to go through that experience, and how it was that she became a champion of the arts. She became Queen of Scotland, then Queen of England as well, and Ireland. So she became one of the most powerful women in the country, and most people would struggle to tell you anything about her at all.
Yeah. So you're getting into the Stuarts. So
Yes.
presumably, I mean, for me, I've always found the 17th century a fascinating period, with the Civil War, King Charles II coming on the throne, the fires, the plague, the invasion by the Dutch coming up the Medway and all that. I found it a fascinating period.
Yeah, well, the idea is to write a trilogy so that I can actually follow the story of Anna of Denmark with the stories of, first of all, Charles I and then Charles II. So that takes me through some big stuff like the Fire of London and the whole of the restoration, well, the regicide, and then the restoration.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to doing all of that.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is new ground for me, because although we obviously did the Civil War in history in quite a lot of detail, we kind of skimped over the characters of the kings involved.
Yes.
So they're kind of a bit two-dimensional in my mind at the moment.
Yeah.
And they're not at all. They're really quite complex people.
Yeah. So you got Samuel Pepys' diaries to read for the reference.
Lots, isn't there? Yeah. But there's a television thing about the fire of London on the other night, and I was thinking I'd be writing about this in 2 years' time.
Yeah.
So that's what I was saying about the research doesn't just start on a particular day.
No.
As soon as you know which period you're going to be writing about, anything to do with it becomes of real interest.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to that, and we'll have to have you back when you got the first one out. So going back to Bess and Frances, what type of feedback have you had from readers?
It's great. In both cases, I get a lot of readers saying, I didn't know anything about these people, and now I feel that I understand them.
Yeah.
I'm really pleased when I get something like that. But what happened was that Bess, not so much Frances, but somehow Bess seems to have captured the public imagination, because on the week of the release of the book, it went straight to top 10 on Amazon US.
Wow.
And became a hot new release, if you think how many, I used to say thousands of books, it might even be getting towards 1 million books. I don't even know how many books a day are released on Amazon these days, but it's a lot of books.
Yeah.
So to get into the top 10 or into the sort of hot new release zone is really encouraging.
Yeah. No, it's great to hear, Tony. Where can people find out more about what you do and obtain the books?
My website is easy to find because it's tonyriches.com. And what you can do now, there is another author called Tony Riches, which is quite funny. He writes about Romans, and we've kind of agreed that I'll never write about Romans and he won't write about Tudors or Elizabethans. Yeah. We haven't agreed anything about the Stuarts, mate.
You want to get in quick.
If you type in Tony Riches into an Amazon search bar, then you should get all of my books. And there's an author page there.
Yeah.
But hopefully it's easy to do now.
Yeah.
And you don't need to type anything else in it, RICHES.
Well, it's been great talking to you, Tony. And sadly, that brings us to the end of today's episode of Undercurrent Stories. A huge thank you to Tony Riches for joining us and offering such fascinating insights into the lives of Bess and Frances Tudor, two women who, through his storytelling, have stepped out of the shadows of history and into the spotlight they truly deserve. So if you'd like to explore more of Tony's work, including his latest novels, Bess Tudor Gentlewoman and Frances Tudor Countess, you'll find links in the episode description. And trust me, and I count myself lucky to have read this. I read Penelope, one of Tony's earlier books. If you love rich, character-driven historical fiction, these are definitely must-reads. So if you enjoyed this conversation, please do subscribe, leave us a review, and share this episode. It really helps more people discover the hidden stories that lie beneath the surface. Thank you for coming on the show, Tony.
Yeah, thank you for your time, Bob.